and something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Lots coming up today ahead of the crucial vote on the government's social care plans later. We're talking to Shadow Care Minister Liz Kendall and asking what would Labour do to square the funding circle. Plus, double child killer Colin Pitchfork is back behind bars. We'll have the MP who campaigned against his release. But first, it's the news with Paul.
Thanks, Gloria. Our top story at midday, 15 people have died and more than 40 have been injured after a car ploughed through a Christmas parade in the American state of Wisconsin. An SUV broke through barriers in the city of Waukesha yesterday afternoon, hitting dozens of people, including children. One eyewitness said the SUV was doing 40 miles per hour when it hit the crowd. Police Chief Dan Thompson said a person of interest was in custody, but it wasn't known whether the incident was terrorism related. The Prime Minister says Britain can win the new green industrial revolution, but only if we act now. Boris Johnson has been speaking to business industry leaders at the CBI National Conference from the Port of Tyne in South Shields. He also announced that new homes in England must have electric car charging points from next year. The new measures will also force new supermarkets and workplaces, including those undergoing major renovations, to include charging points.
We're regulating so as to require new homes and buildings to have EV charging points, with another 145,000 charging points to be installed thanks to these regulations. We're investing in new projects to turn wind power into hydrogen, and the net zero strategy is expected to trigger about £90 billion of private sector investment, driving the creation of high-wage, high-skilled jobs across the UK.
In the next hour, mourners are to pay their respects to the politician Sir David Amess at a funeral service and procession in his Southend West constituency. The father of 5 who was stabbed to death while holding a surgery at Belfairs Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea in October. At the service, his friend and former MP Anne Widdecombe is to give a speech, and a horse-drawn hearse will carry the casket through Southend. Gloria will have more on Sir David's funeral in just a moment. Austria has become the first Western European country to enter a 4th nationwide lockdown to tackle soaring coronavirus cases. Austrians have to stay home and can only leave for essential reasons like food shopping, going to the doctor and exercising. Restaurants and most shops have closed while large events have been cancelled. The government will re-evaluate the lockdown after 10 days. The government is facing a potential backlash from Tory MPs over changes to social care plans. Previously, the government said there would be a cap of £86,000 on care costs by 2023, but it's now considering a change to how contributions are calculated. Council funding support will no longer count towards that limit. Under the plans, only an individual's personal payments will be considered. Once the limit is hit, the local authority will pay. Some backbench MPs say the changes could hit poorer people hardest. The least well-off may have to sell their home, which would break a Tory manifesto pledge. Australia will begin to allow foreign visitors to enter the country from the start of December. Skilled workers, international students and refugees will be given priority, but they must hold an eligible visa and be fully vaccinated against COVID. The country did have one of the strictest border policies, allowing only a limited number of Australians and permanent residents in. The number of people contacting the NSPCC with concerns about child sexual abuse has hit a record level. The helpline received over 4,000 calls during the 6 months to October. That's up 36% from the same period in 2020. The charity said survivors are motivated to step forward amid a surge in publicity about sexual violence against women and girls. And shoppers have been warned to be extra careful during Black Friday as millions of pounds were lost to scams over Christmas last year. Action Fraud, which is the National Reporting Centre for Fraud and Cybercrime, saw more than 28,000 people conned out of their money during the festive period. That's an increase of 61% compared with the year before. Nearly £2.5 million was lost to criminals during the Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale events last year. Personal finance expert Laura Retty told GBNews that scams have become so sophisticated that anyone could be at risk.
Those scammers obviously work year round. Black Friday does prove to be particularly lucrative because the psychology often is with retailers. You have to do things in a rush because the bargains won't stick around for long. So shoppers aren't as focused or perhaps as cautious as usual, especially online.
That's all news for now. We'll have more for you in half an hour.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, we're talking social care, a mounting Tory rebellion over the government's plans ahead of a vote tonight. But what would Labour do? We'll talk to Shadow Minister Liz Kendall. And as double child killer Colin Pitchfork is back behind bars, we talk to the MP who campaigned against his release in the first place. And my exclusive interview with Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth. We talk loss, regrets and ambition. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Now, today is the Southend funeral of murdered MP Sir David Amess. The killing of a decent and innocent public servant rocked Westminster and wider society. Today, mourners will gather to pay their respects at a service and procession in Sir David's Essex seat, ahead of a service at Westminster Cathedral tomorrow. Our reporter, Ellie Costello, is in Southend for us. Ellie.
Hi, Gloria. Yes, a very sad day, a very important day here in Southend for the family, the friends, the close colleagues of Sir David to say goodbye to a very much loved character. You can hear the bells of St Mary's in Prittlewell. They've just started to toll as we've come to you live, Gloria, and that service will start in just under an hour. We're told that the church is at capacity. 450 people will be coming into this church. You can see people already going into the church behind us. We know that Sir David's close friend, Mark Francois, the MP for Rayleigh, will be giving the eulogy today. It's a full Catholic service. Sir David was a devout Catholic, a very fitting tribute for him. We know too that the hearse will be in a horse-drawn carriage. Sir David was from the East End of London, and we're told by Mark Francois that it's very East End in style, so it's very fitting tribute for Sir David. After the service ends here at 2 p.m, that hearse will begin its public procession through the streets of Southend, the town that Sir David loved so very much that he campaigned to become a city. And the Queen, in October, after that tragic passing of Sir David, gave this town a city status. So it hasn't happened yet, but it will. And this is ahead of this massive ceremony at Westminster Cathedral tomorrow. But today is about Sir David's close friends, close family, and all those in this town that loved him so very much.
Ellie Costello, thanks so much. Thank you. Now, last week MPs were up in arms about second jobs and northern transport, and things aren't getting any easier for the government tonight. There's a vote on the new social care plan, and many are deeply unhappy with the details. It seems to hit the less well-off much harder than the wealthiest. Well, to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by Shadow Minister for Social Care, Liz Kendall. Liz, hi, good to see you.
Hi.
What's wrong with people having to sell their homes to pay for social care? You could argue it's progressive and it stops people passing on wealth to their children, which causes future inequality.
I think people who've worked hard and saved all their lives want to be able to pass on their hard work on to their children. I think that's That's natural. And what's wrong with what the government is doing is that they're breaking a promise, because actually, if you've got low or modest assets, savings, you aren't going to be protected from having to sell your home to pay for your care. But if you're well off with a big expensive home, you will be protected. That's not what was promised. And I think the real problem with this is that ordinary working people are going to face a massive tax rise, not to improve care services now, not to protect their own parents' homes, but to protect the homes of millionaires. And I think that's unfair and it's wrong. And I really hope that Conservative MPs who want to stand up for their constituents in places like Ashfield, Mansfield, Barrington and other parts of the country where people aren't well off, who are hard-working and they don't want to face that tax rise, I think they should join us in the lobby and vote against this tonight.
The government are at least trying to get a grip on this. They say it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was before. It's a fair argument from the government.
Listen, if people are going to have to pay a national insurance tax hike, council tax rises too, they want to see, what am I getting for my money? Am I going to get better care for my mum who has people come round and help her get up, washed, dressed and fed? If she has to go into a care home, are we actually going to protect her house? No, it's the poorest who are going to be taxed more to protect the assets of the wealthy. And I think most people will think that's completely unfair. The government needs to think again. And what we are calling for is a 10-year plan of investment, but also crucially reform. We need more money in the system, but we also need change. We need a decent pay rise for frontline care workers. We've got big shortages at the moment, and we've got to sort that out. We need to do more to try and keep people in their own homes for as long as possible. I mean, I'm sure you'll know, and people watching this, their families, everybody wants to stay in the family home for as long as they can. So we need to have the reforms that help people stay at home. That's better for them, and it's actually better value for money for taxpayers. Because if you end up going into more expensive hospital or residential care because you can't get the help you need at home, it's not good for you. And it's not good for taxpayers. So investment, yes, but also reform, and it's got to be done in a fair way.
And you say you are against ordinary people paying for this tax rise, but what would the Labour Party do to fund its alternative plans to get a social care system that's fit for purpose?
Well, I think if you're asking people to pay more taxes, you have to have a plan. And we have no plan for reforming care. We now know that actually if you've got low or modest assets, you're not going to get your home protected. That breaks a promise, not just not to increase taxes, but breaks a promise that you wouldn't have to sell your home to pay for your care. So the very first thing we would do, and we're going to do tonight, is oppose that change because it's unfair. And I think if you're, as I said, if you're asking for people's money, you've got to have a plan. You don't just go and, in your daily work, if you've got a small business or whatever, you just don't go and ask people to say, give me the money and then I'll tell you much later on what's going to happen. We haven't even seen their white paper on social care. If you want to ask people for their money, you have to show them that you're going to spend it wisely in the right way that improves care now and protects people's assets in future. And that's what we're saying should happen. We've also set out our plans to support families. Actually, the vast majority of the care in this country is provided by unpaid family carers. Husbands, wives, sons, daughters who are just trying to look after the people they love. And they are having a real struggle at the moment too. We've got 1 in 3 unpaid carers has to give up work or reduce their hours because they just can't get the support they need. Again, doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to businesses who lose their skills, and it doesn't make sense to the taxpayer either. If people are giving up work when they shouldn't have to. There is a really big challenge here. A really big set of reforms need to happen. The government actually hasn't put forward the reforms we need, and yet it's asking people for money. I just think that's wrong.
Finally, Liz Kendall, today is the day of David Amess's funeral, and of course we all send our love and our thoughts are with his loved ones. I just want to know, have you changed the way that you do your constituency surgeries in the light of his murder? And of course that comes following the murder of Joe Cox a few years back.
well, we have had the police in again to look at everything we do to see if there's anything we can do to make things safer. And I'd say that's not just for MPs; it's crucially for our staff. You know, who I really want to make sure they are as safe as possible. You know, I want to be as open and accessible to my constituents as I always have been, but I need to make sure we do it in a really safe way. So we've had another reassessment of the office. What do we need to do? Is there anything we need to change? But like MPs across the House and in all parts of the country, we're trying to get the balance right here. But I would just say for today and tomorrow, I can't imagine what it's like for Sir David's family. And I hope they will see an outpouring of love and sympathy and great support and wonderful memories of the man. We heard in the House of Commons, you know, all sorts of things about him and what he'd done and his background. And it made us, you know, cry and laugh at the same time. And I'm sure that will be the spirit today and tomorrow.
Liz Kendall, a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Gloria.
Coming up, we're talking double child killer Colin Pitchfork being back behind bars with the MP who campaigned against his release. Plus, how to tackle assaults and violence against shop workers. We ask a former shop worker who's now an MP. Before that, it's time for the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Before the weather turns colder and much more unsettled later this week, it's a fine start to the week for many of us. Sunny spells, showers for some, mainly towards the far north, across northern parts of Scotland, with these weather fronts close by, and also a few feeding into parts of southeast England. Otherwise, many places experiencing the fine weather brought about by an area of high pressure, and as a result, for the vast majority, it is a dry afternoon and a sunny one as well. Plenty of sunshine for southern Scotland, much of England, Wales, into southern parts of Northern Ireland. Areas of cloud into northern Scotland, some drizzly showers and outbreaks of light rain for the far north and northwest. A little milder here, and also some showers feeding into Kent and perhaps parts of East Anglia. They'll continue into the evening and overnight with areas of cloud here, and across parts of northern Scotland will continue that feed of milder and cloudier conditions. Otherwise, clear spells and temperatures falling away. Fairly widespread frost, if not air frost, we'll certainly see a ground frost in many places, and a few fog patches to wake up to as well. Primarily across southern and southwest England, a few spots in Wales. They'll soon enough lift and clear, and for many it's a fine day once again. Plenty of dry and bright weather. Still one or two showers for parts of Kent, and still some light rain and drizzle for the north and northwest of Scotland, as well as a keen breeze. 10 Celsius in the north, 8 to 10 further south, but with, again, bright blue skies for the Midlands into South Wales and southwest England. A bit more cloud for northern England, parts of northern and western Wales, as well as East Anglia and the southeast. And actually, for many, it's a cloudier night on Tuesday night, but where we get some clear spells, fairly extensive fog forming in the south, some dense fog patches around first thing. Then it turns windier, wetter and colder later.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, shop workers have borne the brunt of a lot of abuse in the pandemic. Customers angry about wearing masks, frustrated with restrictions and raging about lack of loo roll on the shelves. As we go into the busiest period for retail, Christmas, the Usdaw Union has launched its annual National Respect for Shop Workers Week. The union is calling for more respect for shop workers and demanding that they work protected from violence and abuse and free from fear. Who better to talk about this than former shop worker, now Conservative MP for Keighley, Robbie Moore. Robbie, good to have you back. How are you?
Yeah, very good.
So you were a shop worker, you worked in retail. Just give us some examples of the sort of daily or routine abuse that shop workers are subject to.
Well, I think, like most MPs, we all had a stint at working in a shop at some point or another. And I think now, in the role of being a Member of Parliament, I have had shop workers within Keighley that have come forward to me, sharing the experience that they've had, particularly over the pandemic, about some of the abuse, whether it's been spitting or physical abuse, by consumers coming into the store, which is completely unacceptable.
Should it be made a specific offence to assault a shop worker so it's more straightforward to prosecute the offenders?
Well, so at the moment, the police have the powers and it is already in law that they can prosecute anybody that is physically abusing or spitting at a shop worker. And therefore, what we've got to do is encourage shop workers, a lot of whom don't necessarily report these instances. And we need to ensure that those instances are reported to the police and that employers encourage their employees to come forward and have that dialogue, because it's only once the reports are put forward to the police that the police obviously can do something about it, and that's not happening enough. Right. You know, the British Retail Consortium did a survey recently which indicated that 400 people on a day-to-day basis are being, abused in one way or the other, and that's just not good enough. And we've got to make sure that we tackle that through better reporting and police taking their role more seriously. And
Usdaw, the unions say that every minute of the working day a shop worker is verbally abused, threatened with violence or physically attacked. From your own experience, does that ring true? Obviously, there's a lot of shop workers, but does that statistic shock you? It shocked me when I read it.
Well, yeah, it does. It does shock me, and I think we've obviously seen an increase in these sorts of incidents happening over the last 18 months or so during the coronavirus, because a lot of shop workers have had to implement some of the statutory measures, like wearing a face mask, social distancing, and then consumers have got frustrated by that, and then completely unnecessarily taken that out on the shop employee, which is absolutely wrong, and that's where we need to encourage shop workers to come forward and report these instances, so that then they things can be done about it.
It's the while I have your question. Of course, today is going to be a big day in Westminster when you will all vote later today on the social care plan. Have you decided how you're going to vote?
Well, I have, yeah, and I will be supporting the government.
Why?
Because I think we have to look at what the proposals are. And let's be clear, no government, whether it's been Labour, Conservative or the coalition government, has tackled social care before. And we are seeing that this government are doing something about that. So let's look at the provisions. At the moment, there is no cap on how much an individual can contribute towards their social care provisions. And the government are implementing a cap of £86,000. So that's a first helpful step. And then today what we're seeing is a mechanism that increases the threshold from 23,000 to 100,000. So at the moment, if you're an individual and you have assets that are worth over 23,000, you get no help from the local authority. And we're increasing that to 100,000. So if you're an individual with net assets worth less than 100,000, you're able to get help from the local authority to pay for social care provision. And that's on top with having that cap there as well, because you're then not expected to pay over that cap. And that's going to be paid for by that increase in 1.25% into national insurance that we voted on earlier in the year.
So the argument goes, and we're from the same part of the world, so my parents' house is worth less than £100,000. The argument goes that if you have £1 million house, there's not many of those in Bradford or Keighley, then you would keep the vast majority of that wealth because of the cap. But if you've got a very modest house with lots of people living, then you're going to have to flog it. You're not going to be able to keep as much of your wealth.
So let me just reiterate the point that at the moment there is no cap. So at the moment, you, as an individual, if you're needing health and social care provision, can pay unlimited amounts. We're implementing a cap of 83,000. We are also increasing that threshold. So that will help the most deprived in society that need that help. So we're increasing that threshold from 23,000 to 100,000, where the local authority will be expected to step in and provide, financial support to anyone that has net value assets worth less than 100,000. That's a huge difference to what we're seeing at the moment, where there is no limit and only a very, in terms of the threshold, 23,000, where the local authority can step in and help. And I think that is a huge step in the right direction to be able to get to grips with social care support.
Robbie Moore, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you for coming today. Now, there was outrage when notorious child killer Colin Pitchfork was released in September. Less than 3 months later, he's back behind bars, having apparently sidled up to teenage girls whilst out on walks. He'd raped and strangled two 15-year-olds in the early 80s. Well, one MP who thought Pitchfork should never have been released and campaigned against it is Alberto Costa. He's a Conservative MP for South Leicestershire, where the murders took place, and he joins us now. Alberto, good to see you today. Thank you for joining us. You campaigned against his release. The Justice Secretary asked the parole board not to release him. The community were against his release, but he met the criteria. So there was nothing that can be done. There has to be criteria, and if he met it, what was the alternative?
Well, good afternoon, Gloria, and thank you for inviting me onto your programme. You're right to say that he met the criteria, but we shouldn't, or the parole board shouldn't abrogate responsibility. They made an assessment on the evidence that was presented to them. We don't have a sort of tick box exercise board where if somebody meets the criteria, they're automatically discharged. The independent parole board, on reviewing the evidence from internal psychiatrists and other, made a decision. They chose to release Pitchfork, notwithstanding the repeated objections that I made, that many of my constituents made, and perhaps more importantly, the victims' families and those involved in the criminal justice system made. I recall being contacted by police officers and others that had been closely involved in the Pitchfork case, and they made their views very clearly known to the parole board that this is a man that could not change. Well, we've been proven right. And I'm very glad that the probation service have done an excellent job in recalling Pitchfork into custody. And I think my campaign now is focused on ensuring that not only do we have a root and branch review of the parole board system, but that we keep, more importantly, Pitchfork behind bars for the remainder of his life.
The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, is reportedly looking at reforms to the parole board. What sort of things should he be looking at?
Well, the government has rightly promised a root and branch review of the parole board, and I've been passionately campaigning for this for, as you well know, Gloria, for years now to get this root and branch review underway. The sort of changes that I think would be reasonable to make is to have a more open, more transparent parole board system, maybe even change its name to have a sort of public safety board rather than parole board. Ultimately, the role of the parole board is to protect all of your viewers, all of us, from any reoccurrence of crime from those that they choose to release. But it's important that we all get to see the evidence upon which they base their assessments, just as you would see in an open court if it's a criminal court where somebody's making a plea in mitigation, for example. All that evidence is disclosed to the public. I don't see why we should continue to have such an opaque system that we currently have. So there's enormous rooms for improvement, not least making the system much more open and transparent.
And Pitchfork could be eligible for parole again. He will be in the not too distant future. What can you do? You can't wait for the parole board to be reformed before that review, or can you?
Well, look, as I'm sure your viewers will imagine, given that I've been campaigning on this for 5 years, I have been in contact with the most senior levels of the UK government. And I think there's general political agreement that not only do we need these urgent changes to the parole board system, but we can't have another situation where a Pitchfork-esque individual is released. The parole board now need to do another job with Pitchfork. They need to review the evidence, and they now need to make another judgment call. And I'm going to be following this incredibly closely, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the parole board reassess the original evidence that it had along with this new evidence. We need to ensure that Pitchfork is kept behind bars where he belongs to be. That's the only way that we can truly protect the public.
And finally, Alberto Costa, will you be voting with the government whip this afternoon on that social care vote?
I will be. I think this is a really difficult issue, and there is no easy answer to this. Whoever and whichever policy we enact on the changes that are needed will benefit maybe some people and maybe be less preferential to others. But I think the government has, broadly speaking, come up with a reasonable package. Let's hear the debate today. I will be listening very closely to the comments being made, and I will make an ultimate judgment call. But I do think that we need to move forward on this, Gloria. We've been discussing this, as you know, for decades. It's time.
I'm going to have to come in, Alberto, because we're running out of time. It's always great to have you on the show, and no doubt we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully. Coming up, the latest in my series of special interviews with MPs where we get to know the person behind the politics. Today, it's a good one. Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth talks loss, fatherhood and growing up fast. But first, the news with Paul.
Thanks, Gloria. Our top stories then this hour, and we start with a correction from our previous bulletin. 5 people, that is 5 people have died and more than 40 have been injured after a car ploughed through a Christmas parade in the American state of Wisconsin. An SUV broke through barriers in the city of Waukesha yesterday afternoon, hitting dozens of people, including children. One eyewitness said the SUV was doing 40 miles per hour when it hit the crowd. The Prime Minister says Britain can win the new green industrial revolution, but only if we act now. Boris Johnson has been speaking to business industry leaders at the CBI National Conference from the Port of Tyne in South Shields. He also announced that new homes in England must have electric car charging points from next year. Austria has become the first Western European country to enter a 4th nationwide lockdown to tackle soaring coronavirus cases. Austrians have to stay home and can only leave for essential reasons such as food shopping, going to the doctor and exercising. Restaurants and most shops have closed and large events have been cancelled. The government will re-evaluate the lockdown after 10 days. Shoppers have been warned to be extra careful during Black Friday as millions of pounds were lost to scams over Christmas last year. Action Fraud, which is the National Reporting Centre for Fraud and Cybercrime, saw more than 28,000 people conned out of their money during the festive period. That's an increase of 61% compared with the year before. You're up to date with the latest headlines. We'll have more for you in 25 minutes.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, it's time for the latest in my series of special interviews with MPs where we go behind the politics and get to know the real person. Today, it's a really special one. Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth talks loss, fatherhood and growing up fast.
Jonathan Ashworth, you were active in the Labour Party from the age of 15. Now, I know you quite well, but if I had read that for the first time, I'd think this is a total weirdo.
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, I joined the Labour Party, yes, when I was 15. And I think, as I've been thinking about this, you get some Labour politicians who say they chose the Labour Party. You get other Labour politicians who say they were born into the Labour Party. Looking back, I sort of feel like the Labour Party adopted me because I had a difficult time growing up. My dad had a drink problem, which I've talked about. Also, by the time when I'm sort of 15, 16, 17, it's quite a difficult time at home because my dad's drink problem had led to the divorce of my parents. My mum got involved with another man and they were going through a very messy breakup at that period. I don't really know what exactly went on, but there was a period when I had to leave that house and go and live full time with my dad. My mum disappeared for a while. So it was obviously a very traumatic period for my mum. And, you know, I was a teenager who just thought there's these huge injustices in life, unfairnesses in life. I mean, why was it in the area where I grew up, a place called Radcliffe in North Manchester, why were the schools falling apart? Why did we not get the same opportunities that the kids who went to Manchester Grammar School or Bury Grammar School would get? And I wanted a fairer society, but this was a period of great trauma for me. I was dealing on the one hand with my dad's drinking, on the other hand with my mum in this very difficult relationship, her disappearing. And I suppose the Labour Party became like a family. Didn't have a family really up until that point because I was an only child and was dealing with a lot of issues on my own. So going along to these various Labour Party meetings, I loved it. And I got myself onto the local branch meeting, the local constituency meeting, the local district meeting. I wanted to go to all these meetings. I got myself elected as an observer to the Labour Council. I mean, all this stuff when I was 15, 16, 17, I was obsessed with it because it gave my diary for the week some stability, gave me something to focus on, gave me something to do to sort of turn my mind away from what often felt like chaos at home.
When you weren't at Labour Party meetings, you're going through these periods of trauma. Are you at Labour Party meetings because you don't want to think about what's going on in your life? So you think, I'm not going to engage with this trauma. I'm going to throw myself into this. Or you must have had dark moments when you go to bed at night and your dad's drunk. Or
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not treating the Labour Party like a counselling service, but I am absolutely convinced and remain convinced that if you want to improve society and give everybody the best chance in life, then you need Labour governments in power. And this was the mid-90s, it was 1995, 1996. We were determined to get into power after, with a government that had run out of steam, was scandalous, was rotten.
Jonathan, you see, I want to talk to you about the real you. And it's interesting that you are going to the politics.
Yeah.
And I want to, and I know it's hard, but I want to try and make you focus on what you were going through emotionally at a time when your parents are getting divorced at 15.
No, my parents got divorced when I was about 8 or 9.
But only when you're 15 you go and live with your dad.
Yeah, so they split up and I spend my week bouncing between the two. And then when I'm a sort of 16 sort of age, 16, 17, I think, my mother finally leaves the relationship she's in. It's very difficult. And then I end up going living full time with my dad. But even throughout that period, you see, remember, my dad works in a casino, right?
During this time, your dad's working in the casino at night.
Yeah. So what that means is when you're with your dad, these are long hours, these are shifts, these are night shifts. And well, that essentially means that throughout a lot of the daytime, when he returns home at 4 a.m, he has to sleep throughout the day. And then when he's awake, he's often turning to drink. So you end up growing up pretty quickly. You end up taking responsibility for yourself. Because it's not just the drink bit, it's the fact that if you're working shifts, that impacts on your ability as a parent to spend time with your children. And I was reflecting on this at the weekend. I helped my children with their homework. I actually took my oldest daughter, who's 10, to the Remembrance Sunday. Looking back, I don't ever recall my parents helping me with homework or taking me to something. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily go to Remembrance Sunday because they're not MPs, but you know what I mean? Some sort of community type event like that, because there's so many other things going on in their lives. There's working in the casino, and there's the drinking, and there's my mum's situation with the new man she got involved in.
Was he ever your stepfather?
Well, I suppose, I mean, technically he would have been, but the relationship broke down with my mum, and I've never seen him, heard of him since. But it was obviously quite difficult because there was a period when, as I say, she left me, disappeared for a while.
So your dad worked in a casino. What did your mum do?
Well, my mum, I mean, by this point, my mum's just on benefits. But my mum met my dad because they were both working in the Playboy Casino in 1970s Manchester. She was a bunny girl. My dad was a croupier and then became a pit boss. So they worked in the Manchester Playboy Club together. And the stories you hear from them are quite extraordinary, really. This is sort of 1970s Manchester, the glamour of Man United, the glamour of various comedians coming in there. My mum tells a story. It shows you how appalling attitudes were then and how things have changed, that every week the bunny girls would have to line up and be weighed by the head bunny, or whatever the head bunny girl was called, to make sure they hadn't put on weight. I mean, it's absolutely terrible. And my dad had all these wonderful stories about working in the Playboy Club in 70s Manchester. I remember, this is the time, do you remember that famous picture of George Best pouring champagne on all the champagne glasses surrounded by bunny girls? Yeah. Now, that wasn't actually the Manchester Playboy Club, but it's that period, that captures this period. And my dad tells these stories, and I don't know if this story has been kind of exaggerated or it's not quite right with the telling, but this is how it got told to me. that if you remember the famous Jamie Thorpe case,
Yes.
Jamie Thorpe was at the Old Bailey accused of trying to murder his lover, and the dog ended up getting shot. He was defended by a remarkable barrister called George Carman, famous barrister. And so the story is, and I'm probably been exaggerated in the telling over the years, but so the story is...
From your dad?
From my dad. That the night before he was defending Thorpe in London, Carman was at the roulette table at the Playboy Club in Manchester with a load of bundles of his legal papers on the roulette table. And I don't know what time the club's closed then. They're open all night now, but in them days, I imagine they shut at 2 or 3, I don't know. My dad had to bundle Carman out of the Playboy Club into a black cab all the way down to London in order to defend Jeremy Thorpe the next day. Now, there's probably some exaggeration in that story, but there's probably an element of truth in it, one way or another. And it's things like that. My dad had all these wonderful stories. So he was a wonderful man. He was sort of a great character. I loved being in his company, but he just couldn't help but allow himself to be gripped by drink and alcohol.
How old were you when you realised this?
I mean, quite young. I remember there was a period when he was drinking a bottle of whiskey a day, Canadian club whiskey a day, and he ended up in hospital, probably what was then called Crumpsall Hospital, now North Manchester General. I remember going to visit him in hospital.
How old?
I don't know,
About
6, 7. That
oh
sort
my
of age.
gosh, that young.
And I didn't really understand what was happening at the time, but subsequently I learned that the doctors basically said to him, "You're going to die unless you pack the drinking in." He didn't pack the drinking in, but he moved from whiskey, Canadian whiskey, to white wine. And then throughout my childhood, the fridge would always be just full of these big bottles of cheap white wine from the off licence. There were times when that's all that was in the fridge. I'd come over and that's all was. I'd be like, God.
Was there always tea made for you? Like, did you always have a decent meal when you were living with your dad?
There was food, but I often had to go to the shop and get buy the food, buy it as well.
He'd give you a bit of money and say, go and get some food. Go and get some food for yourself.
But he was never abusive.
No.
And there was never violence.
No.
There was nothing like that. And he was, I don't know, somebody can probably do some sort of psychological research into it, but he was a clever man who, failed his 11 plus. He could have done so much more in life. The reason he got a job, he started off on the docks in Salford. The reason he got a job in the casinos when the casinos opened up, because he was good at maths. He could add up if you've won on roulette, he could add up how much the punter has won and things like that. He was good at maths. So he always talked to me about politics, about society. He was quite philosophical, but I don't know. Alcohol it can be fun, but it's fun if you're at a party or whatever, but when you're just there with your dad, time after time, night after night, it gets you down because it's, here we go again, drinking too much.
Did you cry yourself to sleep?
I didn't cry myself to sleep.
Did you shut off?
I think I probably shut off. You don't really know what to do. Don't really know who to speak to. I remember ringing Childline.
Really?
And then I'll just let it ring, and then I thought, oh, no, I can't do this. So I put the phone down. I remember going to a phone box next to the bus stop in Radcliffe outside the church. And
how old are you at this point?
At that point, probably about 12 or something.
So young.
But remember when you're a child, if you don't know anything else, you just get on with it, don't you? You just get on with it. You've got no option.
There's no option.
And I mean, he had girlfriends who came and went. So sometimes he had a girlfriend who was there. That was nice because obviously, but the girlfriends eventually get fed up of his drinking. So there were periods when there was someone else there. The level of the drink abuse, it destroys everything in the end. And fast forward to when I'm 30, I go home on Christmas to see him, and he says to me, "I'm going." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm going to Thailand." I said, "What do you mean on holiday?" He said, "No, to live." I was like, "You what? You off your head?" He went, "No, I'm going." And he just literally went. So he was about 58 at this point. He just literally went. I thought, okay. Now by this point, I'm working for Gordon Brown and things like that, so he's gone. Every now and again, I'd get a Thai number would come up on my phone. My dad ringing me from Thailand, drunk. Anyway.
What did he say when he rang you? He loved you.
Yeah, when you're coming over, it's great over here. What's going on? Oh, just drunk rubbish. The way drunk people speak. Anyway, and in the summer of 2010, it comes around. I get married, and my dad rings me 2 days before the wedding. Goes, "I'm not coming." So why? It's my wedding. I thought you booked a ticket. I've cancelled it. He said, "I'm not coming. I'm not coming." Anyway, that was that. I was so angry with him. I said, "Oh, fine, you do what you want then." And I didn't speak to him. I was so furious at the wedding day. I didn't speak to him. Couldn't speak to him on the day. And 2 months later, he was dead. I got a phone call on a Friday morning. The phone was ringing at 6 a.m. I looked at the number. It was a Thai number. I was like, "Oh, God, he's drunk again." Rang, I didn't answer. Rang again, didn't answer. I answer it, it's this woman. She says to you, "Are you Jonathan Ashworth? Are you John Ash's son?" I said, "Yeah." She said, and I knew. It's weird, isn't it? You know these things, isn't it? At that point, she said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "He's dead, isn't he?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "What was it?" And she said, almost matter-of-factly, but not in a cruel way, and I don't blame her for it, this woman, she said, "You do know your dad was an alcoholic, don't you?" And of course I knew. Of course I knew I'd grown up with it. But to hear those words said out loud in that way, it just sort of, it was like a punch in the stomach or, I don't know, a slap round the face, or like a ton of bricks had come down on me. Yeah, and he was, what, 60? It's no age, is it? It's just drinking every day. Back on the whiskey. Thai whiskey this time. And then I subsequently heard, not from him, subsequently heard from, because I had to go over there and make the funeral arrangements and sort it all out and deal with all the bureaucracy of it all. I subsequently heard from the friends, the little group of them, that he couldn't come to the wedding. He felt he couldn't come to the wedding because he thought he would embarrass me in front of my posh friends, because he thought he'd get so drunk that I'd be ashamed of him. Because at that wedding would have been, Gordon Brown and other Labour MPs and journalists, people who work in Westminster. People who, to him, he would think they were posh because they went to university and talk in clever ways, and use long words and have fancy jobs. He felt he couldn't come because he would embarrass me. He was my dad. Of course I wanted him. Anyway.
Jonathan, right, okay, let's talk. Let me try and pull myself together as well, because I could have just, it's so evocative. I felt like I was there, and thank you for being so open. Let me talk to you about the most incredible success that you have had in your life despite this. In your 20s, you are a special advisor to the Chancellor of the Exchequer in a Labour government.
I am, yeah.
I mean, my goodness. You come through that trauma, you do incredibly well at school, you turn all the trauma and you focus on ensuring you have a better life. What is it? It must have been mind-blowing.
It was extraordinary. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it when I got the job. I was 25. I got a job at the Labour Party after university as a researcher. I did a sort of youth job for the Labour Party, and then became a researcher, and then an economics researcher, and then I just got this opportunity from going. But I wasn't expecting, I didn't apply for it. They were looking for somebody.
You came in shortly after me, so 11 years you've now spent in opposition. It's hard for it not to feel utterly meaningless. You're now the longest-serving Labour Shadow Health Secretary in history. Do you want the big job?
I'm ambitious to be the health secretary. A lot of your viewers probably live in places like, I don't know, Rotherham, Doncaster, Ashfield.
Yeah.
In those areas, you're likely to live, on balance, on average, 10 years less than someone in Surrey. You're more likely to have heart disease. You're more likely to have cancer. You're more likely to suffer from depression. That's not fair. We've got to do something about it. And that's what I want to sort out if I'm the health secretary. That's why I want to be the health secretary. And you can make a difference from opposition, not big differences. You need to be in government to make the big differences. You need to be in government to deal with these issues. Why somebody in Ashfield has a lower life expectancy than somebody in Surrey. But one of the things that when I spoke about alcohol, actually Jeremy Hunt got in touch with me. He was the health secretary, and he agreed to work with me on putting in place a support for children of alcoholics. And we put together a £6 million plan to support children of alcoholics. And we actually announced it together as a joint press release. Can you imagine that? Health Secretary and the Shadow Health Secretary did a joint press. We announced it together on College Green. Unfortunately, he's really tall, I'm really short, so we look utterly ludicrous on the TV screens. It's a bit like that, that sort of Two Ronnies John Cleese sketch. I look down on him and I look up at him. It was a bit like that, because we just looked so ludicrous. But we've got £6 million to support children of alcoholics. So you can make a difference, but you make a bigger difference by getting into government. So yes, I'm ambitious, but I'm ambitious to be the health secretary. I don't want to be the longest serving shadow health secretary. I want to be the longest serving health secretary.
Jonathan Ashworth, I thought that was an incredible exchange. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. I'll be back with Liam between 2 and 3, but for now, it's time for your weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Before the weather turns colder and much more unsettled later this week, it's a fine start to the week for many of us. Sunny spells. Showers for some, mainly towards the far north, across northern parts of Scotland, with these weather fronts close by, and also a few feeding into parts of southeast England. Otherwise, many places experiencing the fine weather brought about by an area of high pressure, and as a result, for the vast majority, it is a dry afternoon and a sunny one as well. Plenty of sunshine for southern Scotland, much of England, Wales into southern parts